I used to believe that love, once bruised, simply healed into silence. That after years of betrayal, you could learn to coexist with someone and call it peace. That's what it's like with Michael, my husband. We share a house but not a life. We exist in parallel, our paths crossing briefly in the kitchen, over forgotten dinners and stiff morning nods. We were once in love, once new. But now, he sleeps on one side of the bed and I on the very edge of the other. There's a cold trench between us. And yet, we keep the illusion going, for the world, for our son. Evan is 20. Bright-eyed and full of that familiar eagerness I once had before life dulled my edges. He still hugs me like he did when he was a boy, arms wrapped tightly, his chin tucked against my shoulder, as if the world might collapse if he let go. He was always that kind of child, sensitive, careful, watching the world and asking all the questions no one had answers to. Michael wasn't there for most of it. He missed the science fairs, the late-night fevers, the sound of Evan's first guitar playing off-key in the living room. I was there. Always. Maybe that's why Evan clings to me in a way that most boys his age don't. It was late on a Sunday, the sky outside turning lavender with the weight of a coming storm. The rain tapped gently against the windows like a child asking to be let in. Michael was predictably not home. He was working late. I didn't ask. I hadn't asked in years. The truth was a room I'd long ago locked and lost the key to. Evan was in the kitchen, standing barefoot on the cool tile, rummaging through the fridge. I watched him from the hallway, the light casting a golden outline around him. He looked so much like me. The same hazel eyes, the same gentle slant of a smile. But his quietness, that was all his own. "Want tea?" he called without turning. "Sure," I said, stepping into the room. He poured the water, and we stood in silence, the kettle beginning to hum. Evan had this way of being near that never felt intrusive. I could exist next to him in silence, and somehow, it felt louder than any of the words Michael and I had thrown at each other in recent years. "You're quiet tonight," I said gently, taking the mug he offered me. He shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Just thinking. About life," he replied with a soft laugh. "And you?" That made me blink. "Me?" He nodded, his gaze fixed on the window. "You used to smile more. Laugh louder. You used to hum when you cooked." The words caught me off guard. Not because they were untrue, but because I hadn't realized he noticed. I always thought I'd done a decent job of hiding the where. "I suppose time changes things," I said, stirring sugar into my tea. Evan looked at me then, eyes gentle, his brows drawn just slightly together. "It shouldn't take away the good things." I looked away, swallowing hard. "No, I suppose it shouldn't." Later that evening, the power flickered and went out. The storm had arrived full force, turning our quiet neighborhood into a wash of shadows and shivering trees. I lit candles while Evan found a flashlight and brought out extra blankets. The heater was out too, so we gathered in the living room, the fireplace crackling with slow effort. I had curled up on one end of the couch, blanket pulled up to my chin. Evan sat at the other end, his long legs stretched out beside mine. There was no TV, no distractions. Just firelight and silence. "Mom," he said after a long moment, "do you think people can find joy again, after they've stopped looking?" His voice was low, his question hesitant. "I think," I said slowly, "that joy doesn't always knock. Sometimes you have to open the door even when you're afraid." He was quiet, and I looked at him. His eyes weren't on the fire. They were on me. "I don't like seeing you hurt," he said simply. I reached over, placing my hand on his. He didn't pull away. His fingers tightened slightly around mine. We sat like that, our hands tangled, the storm raging outside. And something in me, something old and tired, felt warm again. Not in the way it once had with Michael, but different, softer, stranger. When he finally rested his head against the back of the couch, his shoulder brushing mine, I let it happen. The warmth of his body beside me, the closeness, the comfort, it filled a space that had been empty for so long I'd forgotten how it felt to be seen. We said nothing else that night, but the distance between us felt smaller. I used to think I knew every shade of love. The bright, burning first flames. The slow embers that come with time. The cold, empty ash that's left when it dies. But I didn't know this. This was something new. It started innocently, perhaps too innocently. A laugh here. A touch of the hand there. Evan had always been affectionate, always kind. But lately, his kindness had a new energy behind it. I told myself it was my imagination. That he was just being sweet. That the absence of Michael had turned me overly sensitive. But then came the videos. It became our evening ritual. After dinner, after the silence that now sat permanently at our table between me and my husband, Evan and I would end up on the couch again. Sometimes with tea, sometimes with wine, and always with laughter. Evan would open his phone and scroll through his social media feed, showing me silly videos, dogs dressed like people, babies with too much personality, odd cooking fails. His laughter always came easy, the kind that fills a room and makes you laugh even if you didn't think it was funny. One night, we curled up with a blanket while rain once again pattered gently against the windows. Michael was away. Again. I didn't ask where. Evan held the phone between us. His shoulder brushed mine, warm and solid. We watched a short clip, a couple dancing in the middle of a grocery store aisle. She wore a floppy sun hat. He spun her like they were under the stars. Words scrolled across the screen in delicate white letters. You should trust love, even when it scares you. Because love is always worth the risk. Evan didn't laugh this time. He didn't even smile. Slowly, almost cautiously, he turned his head and looked at me. We were inches apart. His voice was low. Do you think that's true? That love is worth it, even if it scares you. I stared at him. The question caught me off guard. Not just the words, but the way he said them. There was something raw in his tone. Uncertain. Hopeful. I hesitated. I suppose it depends on what kind of love you're talking about. Any kind, he said. His eyes didn't leave mine. The kind that sneaks up on you. The kind that feels impossible. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. There was a heat in my chest. A slow, uncoiling warmth in my stomach that startled me. My fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. I smiled, trying to make light of it. Are you secretly in love with someone and hiding it from me? He chuckled, but the sound was different, lower, quieter. No. I just wonder if some people wait too long. If they're too afraid to feel something because they think it's wrong. The air around us shifted. I couldn't name it, but it was there. An invisible current moving between us. And deep down, I felt it. Something had started. That week, we both changed, subtly, but enough that I noticed. He watched me more. Not in the casual, distracted way sons glance at their mothers, but with a kind of attentiveness I hadn't felt in years. And God help me, I started noticing things about him I had tried not to before. The curve of his jaw, the quiet confidence in the way he moved. The way he filled a room with warmth, even when he wasn't saying a word. I had no map for this. One morning, as I was sipping coffee at the kitchen island, Evan came in wearing a soft blue t-shirt and gym shorts. His hair was still damp from a shower, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He leaned against the fridge, watching me with an amused smirk. What? I asked, setting down my mug. He shrugged, then said something that made the world tilt just slightly. If only you didn't look like a girl. I blinked. A girl? You know what I mean, he said quickly, his smile both mischievous and careful. So young. So attractive. My heart skipped. My cheeks burned. I looked down at the coffee mug, as though it might rescue me. Evan, I said, but my voice was too soft to sound scolding. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. I don't know about other men, Mom, but you're very hard to resist. There was no mocking in his voice. No teasing. Just something quiet. Honest. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, blinking, feeling as though someone had opened a door I didn't even realize was locked. Then he kissed the top of my head, gently, and said he'd be back from the gym in an hour. And just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was stormy. My thoughts churned like waves in high wind. I stood, walked, paced. I stared out the window but saw nothing. Inside me, 1,000 feelings collided like wild horses. My heart thundered in my chest. I pressed a hand there, trying to calm it. But it wouldn't listen. I felt lifted. As though I were weightless. I was glowing in a way I hadn't felt in years. A woman seen, noticed. Desired. By Evan. My son. The thought came to me like a cold gust. But even that wasn't enough to extinguish the warmth that lingered in my body. I wrapped my arms around myself, smiling before I could stop it. Then frowned. Then smiled again. Nothing had happened. Not really. It was just a moment. A comment. A look. But something had changed. And I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it. The next morning, the world tried its best to return to normal. Birdsong came through the windows. The coffee maker hissed and sputtered in its usual rhythm. Michael left early for work, kissing the air near my cheek as though the very act of touching me had become unnecessary. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not really. I stood at the sink, washing an already clean mug, staring blankly into the backyard. The trees swayed in the spring wind, innocent and unaware. And inside me, that warmth from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, it had rooted itself deeper. I heard the door swing open behind me. Evan's voice was light, almost breezy. "You're up early." I glanced over my shoulder. He stood in the doorway wearing that same easy grin he always did. But now I noticed how it lingered. How it searched my expression like he was trying to guess what I was feeling. "I didn't sleep much," I admitted, drying my hands. Evan stepped closer and reached into the cupboard for a bowl. "You've been off lately." I shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Just tired, I guess." He paused, spoon in hand, and looked at me. Not like a son looks at his mother, but like a man waiting for an answer from someone he cares deeply about. "Is it because of what I said yesterday?" His voice was so quiet, so honest, I nearly dropped the mug. I set it down, my hands suddenly unsure what to do with themselves. "Evan." "No," he interrupted gently. "Don't lie. I want to know." I turned to face him fully. "It was unexpected, that's all." He smiled, a bit sheepishly now. "It wasn't meant to upset you." "It didn't," I said before I could stop myself. There. It was out. The truth. Fragile and shimmering in the air between us. For a moment, we just stood there. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator, and beneath it, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "I meant it," Evan said, stepping closer, his eyes not leaving mine. "You are beautiful. You always have been. But lately, I see it differently. Not just as your son, but as someone who really sees you." I should have stopped him. I should have said something clever or maternal or safe. But all I could do was stand there, every part of me frozen in the space between denial and truth. Finally, I said, "You don't think that's strange?" Evan's smile was soft, tinged with sadness. "I think life is strange. Feelings even more so. And somehow, in that quiet kitchen filled with nothing but morning light and echoes of yesterday, I felt more seen than I had in years." After he left for the day, off to meet friends, he said, I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I hadn't shared in spirit with my husband in nearly a decade. My fingers trembled slightly as they rested on my knees. The weight of what I was feeling pressed against me like hands on my shoulders. How did we get here? When did the lines blur? I thought back to when Evan was small and still uncertain of the world. How I had been everything to him then. His source of comfort, of truth, of safety. We had built something together through years of missing pieces and hollow absences from Michael. But now, Evan was no longer a boy, and I was no longer invisible. That evening, the tension found its way back into the room with us. Evan was quieter than usual, respectful, but undeniably present in a way that made my chest flutter. We sat across from each other on the couch, not touching, but not far. He showed me another video, a travel reel of lovers embracing on cliff tops, kissing in warm Mediterranean light. "Would you ever go?" he asked. "To Greece? Or Italy? Or anywhere? Just go." "I used to think about it," I said. "You still can," he said. "You don't have to be stuck here, you know." "Where would I go?" He shrugged. "Wherever you feel something. Wherever you feel like yourself again." He was looking at me again, that gaze that was no longer soft with sonhood, but full of something else. Admiration. Longing. Confusion, perhaps. I reached out, brushing a piece of lint from his sleeve. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe to break the silence. Maybe to feel him near. He caught my hand. His fingers closed gently around mine. He didn't pull me toward him, didn't do anything sudden. But he held my hand like it was precious. Like it mattered. "I think you're the most extraordinary person I've ever known," he said. My heart clenched. "I don't know what this is," he added, "but I know it doesn't feel wrong to care about you this much." I lowered my eyes. "I'm your mother," I whispered, the words a threadbare shield. "You're Claire," he replied, "and you're more than you let yourself be." I couldn't speak. I let him hold my hand a little longer. And somewhere deep inside, I felt that shift again, that trembling balance between right and real, between the past I had survived and the future I never expected to want. The days after that passed in a delicate quiet, like walking barefoot through glass, careful not to break anything, especially myself. Michael remained his usual ghost of a presence. Late nights, absent glances, conversations that died before they even began. I didn't question where he went. I hadn't in years. His infidelity had stopped being a wound and turned into something more abstract. Just another part of the furniture. A scar on the wall you eventually stop noticing. But with Evan, everything felt heightened. Aware. As if life had come back into color. We didn't speak of what had been said. But we didn't retreat from it either. He lingered more. Stood a little closer. His glances carried meaning that danced just beyond the edges of words. I caught myself wondering if he would say more. If I wanted him to. Then one evening, everything tilted just a little further. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through an old book of recipes I hadn't opened in years. Something about it, the creases in the pages, the worn corners, felt comforting. Familiar. Like a past self I'd nearly forgotten. Evan walked in, fresh from the gym. His shirt clung to him in places, and his damp hair curled slightly around his forehead. He looked so alive. And he smiled when he saw me like I was the only person in the world worth seeing. He poured himself water and leaned against the counter, watching me. "You cook less now," he said. I gave a soft smile. "I suppose I stopped having anyone to cook for. You always had me." I looked up. His expression wasn't teasing. It wasn't light. He meant it. I closed the book gently. "You're not a little boy anymore, Evan." "I know," he said. "And you're not just my mother." The words settled like a drop of ink in water. Spreading, darkening everything. I should have stopped him. But my silence said enough. He moved toward me, slowly, cautiously. As if afraid one wrong word would shatter the fragile balance we were dancing on. He stood beside my chair, and I felt his fingers brush against my shoulder. His touch was featherlight, but it sparked something volcanic in my chest. "I've tried to ignore it," he said softly. "To pretend it was just admiration. Just the closeness we've always had. But it's more, Mom. I feel something I don't know how to explain." My throat tightened. This can't be right." "No," he said. "But it's real." I looked up at him then, and for a moment I saw not just my son, but a man. One who had grown up in the shadows of absence and found love where it was actually given. A man who understood me more than anyone ever had. "I've been numb for so long," I whispered. "I didn't even realize it until you started making me feel again." "Then maybe," he said, crouching beside me, taking my hand again, "this isn't about wrong or right. Maybe it's about finally letting yourself be loved." The air was heavy. Sacred. He leaned his forehead gently against my knee, his fingers wrapped around mine. He didn't ask for anything more. He didn't push. He just stayed there, quiet, open, vulnerable. And I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers lace into his hair, my hand resting there like it had when he was small and frightened by thunderstorms. But this wasn't a storm. This was the calm before something impossible. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually, I rose. I stepped back. I told him I needed air. And I walked. The night outside was cold. The stars were sharp and cruel, glittering like judgment. I leaned against the porch railing, trying to catch my breath. What was I doing? What had I allowed? But deep inside, beyond the guilt, beyond the uncertainty, a sliver of something beautiful took root. I wasn't confused about how I felt. I was confused that it came from him. I had longed to be seen, to be touched not just out of duty, but with reverence. And now, the only one offering me that was the one person I never imagined. The one I gave my life to from the moment he was born. But now he offered me something back, not as a child, not even as a son, but as someone who loved me fully. I stayed out there for an hour. And when I finally came back inside, Evan was asleep on the couch, arms folded across his chest. Peaceful. Waiting. He didn't stir as I covered him with a blanket. And I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, nothing was said. We danced again around the edge of words, choosing to exist in the space between. But when he smiled at me, I saw it again, that deep, unflinching tenderness that terrified and comforted me in equal measure. And I smiled back, because I knew somehow that something had changed in both of us. Something we could never undo. And maybe we didn't want to.